population growth has declined mainly due to the abrupt decline in the global total fertility rates, right? From 5.0 in 1960 to 2.3 in 2020. Wow.
See,
so less than half.
Is that crazy? And again, it's working. Whatever is going on is working. Because like I say, I think that you look more and more into...
But what's the point?
I just think there's too many people on the planet. I don't think we can...
But the fertility rate's been cut in half. It's clearly there's population decline is going to happen.
Sure. And then I guess the question is, how is that happening? I mean, what's different now and to the point where this population started to turn and go the other way, started to decrease? Listen, when you look at that, the stones up there in Georgia.
Yeah.
When you look at...
What actually happened to those? Someone like drove their car into them or something?
No, they actually dynamited them. They blew them up.
Dynamite?
They used dynamite on them.
Jesus.
So, and again, now that was generated by a gentleman who did not want to be identified. He went through a banker. Matter of fact, the banker's still alive. The gentleman who did this has passed away, I think, 10 or 12 years ago. But the stones pointed out basically the population was just too many people on the planet. 500 million was the maximum number that the planet could sustain and do it well. So, and in 7 different languages, it outlines what we need to do in order to get back on track to be able to survive. So why someone wanted to destroy that is kind of odd.
They just didn't believe in it. They weren't going against their ideology.
Yeah, but again, think of it's one thing to go, okay, I don't believe in this. And
terrorist.
Yeah, it's another thing to blow it up. And I'm like, wow. So it meant even the guy that initially knew who this individual was, the banker, even today, he still won't tell what his name was.
Really?
And he goes, and when they asked him why, they said it takes away from, he's afraid that they'll take away from what the message of the stones really is if they find out who he is. Right. So I don't know if that means he was a somebody or just a nobody, and why would a nobody know this? But it's interesting across the board because I tend to believe, again, watching where we are today with food across the board, and we're obviously trying to grow more and more and more. The farmers are having a problem with the land because they're over farming the land, and then the dirt takes abuse because there's just not enough nutrition in the dirt to make really whole foods. So they can't rotate the crops the way they once did. So, again, we go back to this genetically modified food that I don't think does any of us any good.
I was talking to Lexi about this the other day. I was asking him, I'm like, right now, what is the average lifespan of somebody over the last 20 years? The average lifespan is what, like 80s, 90s?
I want to say like 82, 83.
And I was wondering, I'm like, what do you think the average lifespan is going to be of somebody who's in their 20s and 30s today? I was like, I think just, due to technology, due to all the, crazy, DNA hacking or Neuralink technology that's going to come out, and just advancement in science and medicine that I bet will probably live to about 150 years. 150 years old.
There's really no reason we can't.
And then she was like, yeah, but food is becoming more and more processed and convenient, and nutrition is lacking more and more, than it was back in the past. Like, it just seems like there's more processed foods and sugars and shit like that than ever.
Look in the 60s, man. There were no fat people in the 60s.
Right.
You had people that were overweight, but there was no fat people. When you go back and look today and look at the obesity, which is really brought on by sugar. Sugar is... I had my brother-in-law about 10 years ago tell me, oh, sugar's the worst thing you can put in your body. And I'm like, Joe, relax. It's sugar. I mean, come on. And after talking to several nurses, she said if you took a blood test right after you ate a bunch of sugar, you'd flip out at what your blood was doing. And she then, alluded to how bad it was for you across the board. I never really thought about it, but I've kind of gotten away from more of this sugar, heavy, sweet stuff. I don't drink Cokes at all. I haven't had a Coke or a Mountain Dew in 20 years.
Wow.
I refuse to drink them. They're just nothing but laced with sugar. Alcohol has sugar in it. It is sugar. You get a disease from being an alcoholic. Your arms get real thin. You get a bloated stomach, and your legs get real thin. Again, brought on by sugar. Is this a process to thin the herd out? I mean, we get rid of all the drinkers.
Or just money. Is it just fucking easy money? Because the problem is really only in the U.S., right? Like, there's no other countries that have this epidemic of malnutrition and bullshit food and obesity. Obesity is like 70% of the population.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
It's insane. Is there any other countries like that?
Listen, not that run on the obesity. Even that, it's funny when you brought that up. I talked to one of my buddies from Homeland Security here because they were having a problem with the power grid going down, and they believe that there were other entities out there that were actually dragging the power grid down. Not to mention that this was in California, they were driving through and shooting transformers with a .22 rifle.
Right.
So the transformers are only made in 3 different countries, the U.S. being one of them. And they're a real hard item to get because there's just not a super demand for them across the board. They're not supposed to leak out oil and catch on fire. And they were trying to figure out who was doing this and why they were doing this, and looking at people that were trying to control certain parts of the power grid. Well, I said, well, dude, why would that matter? He said, well, let me tell you this, man. Right now in this country, there are 100 million diabetics. There's another 80 million that are pre-diabetic. He goes, insulin must be kept refrigerated. If you lose power for 90 days, the bodies will stack up at the hospitals like you will not believe. And he goes, that shuts down everything, because the hospitals will shut down, truckers will be afraid to go anywhere, and all just through something as simple as insulin. So I look, you go back again and you say, well, hold on, this whole sugar thing, is it part of the bigger plan to get rid of those people, where sugar is the enemy? Again, thinning the herd, so we're doing it there. We're doing it genetically through vaccines that you think you're getting. And slowly by surely, they chip away at our ability to have reproduction. If you look at, again, what's happened to the population, I think it's all related at the end of the day. There's just too many people on the planet. We can't sustain it. If you look at, your countries like India, the amount of garbage that they're throwing back into the ocean is just unbelievable. And you don't really think about that in the bigger picture until you start looking at videos, and they show the Pacific Ocean with one area where all of this plastic tends to get dragged into, and then you see the wildlife that eats it. Turtles eat the plastic bags because they think it's jellyfish. And then what happens? They end up starving to death because they've got so much product in their stomach that it's full, but they can't eat anything. So they end up dying. So now now we start talking about extinction of certain animals on a much bigger plane than we were talking about. But is it go back to look at the Black Plague. There's people today that say the Black Plague was not spread by rats and fleas, that there was something bigger, and they believe it was extraterrestrial.
Really?
As they go through, they said, when they show these like reapers in the skies walking through the sky, and he goes, this is what they mean to show that something's delivering this virus. So if you go back and start looking at the history of man, it seems to be whenever they want to thin the herd out, these viruses are made, hence coronavirus. I think started out as SARS originally, and turned into this disease now that kills only people who seem to have relevant conditions. So my sister's husband died because of it. Now, he was 350 pounds, had all kinds of health issues, went into the hospital had the D variant, which they said the D variant doesn't give you a fever. And one of the doctors I spoke to said, well, if the D variant's not giving you a fever, you have no way to fight the bug. So at the end of the day, when I asked my sister, what killed him? What's on his death certificate? What was on his death certificate was he died of pneumonia, brought on by complications of COVID.
When did he die?
About a year ago.
Oh, wow.
So, again, it seems to be able to pick out people who are pre-genetically disposed.
Vulnerable, yeah.
That are vulnerable. So again, are we thinning the herd for only the strongest shall survive?